The morning my grandson ran late for school, I burned the eggs. That never happens. I have made eggs the same way for 40 years, 2 over easy. A little salt, no pepper, and I have never burned them. But that morning I stood at the stove, staring at the window above the sink, watching a crow pull something apart on the fence post, and I forgot I was cooking. The smoke alarm went off. My grandson came downstairs in his jacket already zipped, took one look at the pan, and said, "Grandpa, we gotta go." I scraped the pan into the trash and grabbed my keys and thought nothing of it. I should have paid more attention to that crow. My name is Robert. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a construction and property management company from a single pickup truck and a handshake reputation into something with 40 employees and 4 commercial contracts running at any given time. I am not a man who panics. I am not a man who reads into things. I am a man who checks the load-bearing walls first and asks questions later. That is how I was raised, and it served me well, right up until the morning it almost got me killed. My grandson is 14. His name is Noah. 3 years ago, my son, my only child from my first marriage, died in a highway accident, along with his wife. A driver ran a red light at 60 miles an hour. Noah was at school. He came home to a social worker sitting in his kitchen. When I got the call that afternoon, I drove 4 hours without stopping, walked into that house, and told Noah to pack his things. He has lived with me ever since. I would walk through fire for that boy. I want you to understand that before anything else, my wife and I had been married for 7 years at that point. We met at a charity auction for a children's hospital. She works in nonprofit development, polished and composed in every room she enters. The kind of woman who remembers everyone's name and makes them feel important for it. She was 41 when we married. I was 55. I knew the math looked a certain way to people, and I did not care. She was sharp and she was warm, and she laughed at the right things. I thought I had earned something good after everything I had been through. I want to be careful here. I am not telling this story to be cruel to her memory or to make myself look like a fool. I am telling it because it is true, and because the truth, once I finally held all the pieces together, was stranger and darker than anything I would have invented. The eggs burned on a Tuesday. By Friday of that same week, everything I thought I knew about my life had been taken out from under me like a rug on a tile floor. I dropped Noah at school at 7:45. He got out of the truck, shouldered his backpack, and turned around once to give me a short wave the kind teenagers give you, quick and sideways, but it counts. I watched him disappear through the double doors, then pulled out of the drop-off lane and headed toward the office. I had a subcontractor meeting at 9 and paperwork to sign before that. My phone buzzed at 8:12. I was stopped at a light 2 blocks from the building when I looked down at the screen. It was Frank. Frank had been the overnight and early morning security guard at my company's main office for 15 years. He was 61, a veteran, a quiet man who drank black coffee from a thermos and read paperback westerns at the front desk between his rounds. Most of my staff knew him the way people know a piece of furniture present, reliable, barely noticed. I had always made a point of talking to Frank. My father taught me that the people who watch a building know more about it than the people who run it. The text said, "Don't come inside yet. Drive around to the loading dock. I need you to see something before anyone else gets here." I read it twice. Then I drove around back. Frank was waiting by the dock doors. He had his jacket on over his uniform and his thermos in one hand, and his jaw set in a way I had not seen on him before. He looked at me the way a man looks at you when he has been sitting on something heavy all night and is finally allowed to put it down. "I almost called you at 2 in the morning, he said. "I didn't want to get it wrong." He walked me inside to the small monitor room off the main corridor, 4 screens, split view, covering the parking lot, the lobby, the 2 main hallways, and the executive suite on the 2nd floor. He pulled up footage from the previous night. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. I watched my wife walk through the front lobby. She used a key card. She knew the code to the interior door. She had both of those things because I gave them to her 2 years ago when she said she sometimes needed to pick up documents I had forgotten to bring home. I had not thought twice about it. She was not alone. The man with her was someone I recognized. He was a civil attorney named Garrett. I had used his firm once, years ago, for a zoning dispute. He had come to the house twice in the past year for what my wife described as non-profit legal consultations. Tall, good-looking in a careful way. The kind of man who owns one very expensive watch and makes sure you notice it. I watched the two of them take the stairs to the second floor. I watched them go into my private office. The camera inside that room was one I had installed myself 3 years ago after a break-in scare, a small unit mounted above the bookshelf that most people would take for a smoke detector. Frank had known about it. He was the one who told me the footage existed. They were in my office for 44 minutes. My wife went directly to the filing cabinet behind my desk. She knew which key to use. She pulled 3 separate folders and laid them on the desk, and the attorney photographed each page with his phone. Methodically, systematically, like a man who has done this before. The folders contain my medical records, routine physicals from the past 4 years, my business ownership documents, and, in the third folder, Noah's legal guardianship papers. When I saw her hand the guardianship folder to him and watch him photograph every single page, I had to put both hands flat on the table in that monitor room to stay standing. Frank did not say anything. He let me watch to the end. They left at 12:31 a.m., and she relocked everything exactly as it was. On her way out through the lobby, she paused at the front desk and wrote something on the visitor sign-in sheet. Like a normal guest. Like she had every right to be there. I made a copy of everything, Frank said, and set a USB drive on the table in front of me. Everything from last night, and also 3 other visits I found when I went back through the archive. Tonight was the 4th time. 4 times. She had been here 4 times in the past 8 months. I picked up the USB drive and held it in my fist and stood there in that monitor room for a long moment. I had been feeling off for about 6 months, tired in a way that sleep did not fix. Foggy sometimes in the mornings, slow to find words I had always known, occasionally unsteady on my feet in a way that frightened me. I had been to my doctor twice. He ran blood work. He said stress and age, possibly early fatigue syndrome, suggested I cut back my hours. My wife had come with me to both appointments. She had sat beside me and held my hand and asked the doctor very gently whether cognitive changes were something they should monitor. I had felt grateful to her for that. Now I stood in the monitor room and felt the floor rearrange itself beneath me. I thanked Frank. I told him not to mention this to anyone, and not to come in early today if he could help it. He looked at me steadily and said, "I've been watching out for this building for 15 years, Mr. Robert. I'm watching out for it now." Then he picked up his thermos and walked back to his post like a soldier returning to position. I sat in my truck in the loading dock for 40 minutes before I went inside. I did not call my wife. I did not call my attorney. I did not do any of the things I would have done under normal circumstances because I understood, with a cold and specific clarity, that normal circumstances no longer applied. If she had been working with a civil attorney for months, photographing my ownership documents and my medical records and Noah's guardianship papers, then there was a plan already in motion and I did not yet know its shape. The worst thing I could do was let her know I had found the edge of it. I went to my subcontractor meeting. I signed the paperwork. I spoke normally to my assistant and drank a full cup of coffee and listened to a presentation about concrete delivery schedules and made 2 decisions that I kept entirely behind my eyes. The first decision, I would find out what they were planning before I moved a single piece on the board. The second decision, I would move everything I could out of reach before they could use it. That afternoon, I called a doctor I had not seen in years, a man I had met on a job site, an internist who had retired from practice and consulted now for insurance companies. I explained, without context, that I needed a full physical and cognitive baseline evaluation done privately, off the books, results in writing. He agreed. We scheduled it for the following morning. That evening I came home to dinner already on the table. My wife had made pot roast. She asked about my day. I told her the subcontractor meeting ran long. She asked if I was feeling all right, said I seemed tired, touched my hand across the table. Noah looked up from his phone at me for a second, and something in his face, some small, careful watchfulness, made my chest tighten in a way I pushed back down. I ate the pot roast. I watched her across the table, and I kept my face exactly right. Later that night, I told her I wasn't sleeping well and was going to try the guest room so I wouldn't disturb her. She said that was probably a good idea. She kissed me on the cheek. I lay in the guest room in the dark and stared at the ceiling and ran back through 6 months of symptoms and 2 doctor's visits, and her hand in mine in that office. And I began to understand that the fogginess and the fatigue and the unsteadiness were not stress and age. The doctor I saw the next morning drew blood and ran a full panel. He was thorough and he was quiet, and he did not ask me questions I did not want to answer. When the preliminary results came back 48 hours later, he called me on my cell while I was in my truck in a parking garage downtown. He told me my levels of a particular compound were elevated in a way that was inconsistent with natural exposure. He used specific language I will not repeat here, but the meaning was plain. Something had been introduced into my system over an extended period of time. Not enough to cause acute harm, enough to cause cognitive slowing, fatigue, balance disturbances, enough to make a 63-year-old man look like he was losing his mind. I sat in that parking garage for a very long time. Then I called my attorney, not the one she had used, a different one, a woman I had worked with on 3 major contracts and trusted completely. I told her I needed to meet that day, and that it needed to be somewhere other than her office. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over. I walked her through everything. The footage, the folders they photographed, the medical results, the 4 visits, the months of symptoms. I put the USB drive on the table between us. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Robert, this is a competency proceeding. That's what they're building toward. If they can establish cognitive decline with medical documentation, which apparently you have been providing yourself at those appointments, and if they can get a sympathetic evaluation on record, they petition the court to have you declared legally incompetent. She becomes your legal guardian. She controls the business, the accounts, the property." "And Noah," I said. She paused. "If you're declared incompetent, your guardianship of Noah is automatically reviewed. A 14-year-old cannot remain in the custody of someone deemed legally unfit. He would go to whatever court-appointed placement they recommended." I understood then what the 3rd folder was for. I also understood that my wife did not dislike Noah personally. She had been patient with him, even kind in a distant, managed sort of way. But Noah was the only reason I had not handed her more control years ago. I had always kept things compartmentalized, the business, the accounts, the property, because I had a child in my house who would one day inherit what I had built, and I had never been willing to blur that line. She had known that. She had waited. And then she had found a way to remove us both at once. The attorney told me what I needed to gather and in what order. She was calm and exact, and she looked at me across that table the way Frank had looked at me at the loading dock, not with pity, but with the recognition that what I was about to do was going to require everything I had. Over the next 11 days, I moved carefully, and I moved quietly. I transferred copies of all critical documents to my attorney's office. I opened a separate account at a bank my wife did not know I used, and transferred liquid funds with the legal guidance of my attorney at each step. I had a full second medical evaluation done by a specialist in occupational toxicology, a formal report written up, and a 3rd evaluation done by a neurologist who confirmed that my cognitive function, absent the substance in question, was entirely consistent with a healthy man my age. I stopped eating or drinking anything prepared at home that I had not prepared myself. I told my wife my stomach had been sensitive, and I was on a restricted diet from my doctor. I cooked simple things. I drank water from sealed bottles I bought myself. Within 10 days, the fog had begun to lift in a way that was almost physical, like pressure releasing behind my eyes. I had forgotten what it felt like to think clearly, Noah noticed. One evening, he came into the kitchen while I was cooking and stood at the counter watching me, and then he said, without preamble, "You seem more like yourself." I looked at him. He was standing with his arms crossed and his jaw set in a way that reminded me, with a force I was not prepared for, of his father. "How long have you been worried?" I asked. He shrugged the way 14-year-olds shrug when something has been sitting on them for months. "Since around Christmas," he said. "You were, I don't know, like you were underwater. I thought maybe you were sick and not telling me." I put down the spoon. "I'm going to be fine," I said, "and I need you to trust me for a little while longer without asking questions." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once and took an apple from the bowl and went back upstairs, and I had to stand at the stove with my back to the room for a moment before I could continue cooking. On the 12th day, my attorney called me to her office. She had done her own investigation, working with a private firm that specialized in legal fraud and asset concealment. What they found went further than I had anticipated. The attorney my wife was working with, the man with the expensive watch, had filed preliminary paperwork in a county 2 states over, in a jurisdiction where neither of them had obvious connections, establishing a conservatorship framework under a shell arrangement. He had done this 3 months ago. He was experienced at this. It was not the first time he had done something like it. There had been another man 5 years before me. Older, wealthier, no children. He had been declared incompetent 18 months after his marriage and had died in a care facility 2 years after that. His estate had gone to his wife under the conservatorship. She had sold the property, settled the legal arrangements, and moved on. The firm my attorney had hired found the connection through a name on a notarized document, a name that appeared in both cases. I sat in my attorney's office and I thought about a charity auction for a children's hospital and a woman who remembered everyone's name and made them feel important for it. "We take this to law enforcement now," my attorney said. "Today, not tomorrow." We went to the county sheriff's office that afternoon. My attorney presented the evidence package she had assembled. The surveillance footage, the forensic medical reports, the financial documentation, the prior case connection, the shell filing in the other state. The lead investigator looked through the package with the kind of patience that serious people bring to serious things. He asked clear questions. My attorney answered most of them. At the end, he looked at me and asked whether I believed I was still in immediate danger at home. I told him I had controlled my exposure for the past 12 days, he said. "All right, here's how we proceed." They moved the following morning. I was at the office with Frank when my attorney called to tell me. She said law enforcement had executed search warrants simultaneously at my home, at the attorney's office, and at 2 additional locations tied to the shell arrangement. Both my wife and the attorney had been taken in for questioning. The financial crimes component alone was enough to hold them. The toxicology evidence elevated it further. I sat at my desk in the executive suite, and I looked at the framed photo on my bookshelf Noah at his last birthday, standing in front of a truck cake I had commissioned, because the year before, when he first came to live with me, he had said his favorite vehicle was a concrete mixer. The kid loves construction equipment. Gets it honestly. I put my face in my hands for about 30 seconds. Then I straightened up and called Frank on the desk phone to tell him he could stand down. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Figured it was done when the unmarked cars went by this morning." "I owe you more than I know how to say, Frank." "You always stop to talk," he said. "Most people don't. That's all there is to it." I picked up Noah from school that afternoon myself. He got in the truck and looked at my face and said, "It's over, isn't it?" It was not a question. "It's over," I said. He put his seatbelt on and looked out the window for a long moment. Then he said, "Can we get burgers?" We got burgers. We sat in a booth at the kind of place that still puts peanuts in a bucket on the table and lets you throw the shells on the floor, and Noah ate 2 full burgers and talked about a history project he was working on, and told me about a kid at school who had done something funny at lunch, and I listened to every word of it with the specific and grateful attention of a man who understands what it means to almost lose something irreplaceable. The legal proceedings took 8 months. My wife was charged with financial fraud, elder abuse, and criminal poisoning. The attorney she had worked with faced charges in 2 states. The prior case had been reopened when the connection surfaced, and the estate of the man who had died in that care facility was under review. I will not tell you the number of years they each received, because that is a matter of public record, and this is not a courtroom summary. I will tell you that the sentences were not light. I will tell you that the judge was a woman in her mid-50s who read the toxicology report into the record herself, slowly and carefully, and looked at my wife over her glasses when she was finished. I sold the house. I did not want Noah to grow up in those rooms, and I did not want to either. We moved to a smaller place on the east side of town, a 2-story with a big backyard and a workshop attached to the garage, which I have been slowly filling with tools and projects. Noah has started coming out there with me on weekend afternoons. He is not handy yet. He has the enthusiasm without the patience, which is exactly where you want to be at 14, but he is learning, and watching him figure out how a thing fits together is one of the best parts of my week. I had my medical status formally reviewed and certified, Every document that had been built toward the competency proceeding was pulled and voided. My business is intact. My accounts are intact. Noah's guardianship is intact and uncontested. I had lunch with Frank last month at a diner near the office. He ordered a Reuben and talked about a fishing trip he was planning with his brother and asked about Noah. I told him about the workshop project, about the truck cake story, about Noah's history project, which turned out to get a B+. Frank laughed at the truck cake. He has a good laugh, the kind that comes out of the chest. Before we left, he said, "You know, I almost didn't send that text. I kept thinking, what if I'm reading it wrong? What if I make trouble over nothing?" I told him there was no version of events in which he was reading it wrong. I told him that men like him, men who pay attention, men who notice what others walk past, men who decide to speak when it would be easier to stay quiet, are rarer than most people understand. He waved that off the way he waves off most things, with one hand and a slight shake of his head. But I meant it, and I think he heard that I meant it. Here is what I know now that I did not know before. I know that the people who love you most are not always the ones who say it loudest or stand in the most prominent places. Sometimes love is a security guard at a loading dock at 8 in the morning, holding a USB drive with shaking hands, waiting for you to drive around back. I know that the fogginess that had been closing over my life for 6 months was not weakness or aging or failure. It was something done to me, and the fact that I pushed through it, that I got Noah to school every morning, and ran my company, and looked out the window at that crow on the fence, and still somehow knew something was wrong, even when I could not yet see what that matters. It counts for something. I know that 63 is not old. I know that the same stubbornness my ex-wife used to tell me would be my downfall, the refusal to stop, the inability to leave a job site before the work is level, was exactly what I needed when someone was counting on me not to figure it out. And I know this. If you are reading this, and something in your life does not feel right, if the ground under your feet has a different pitch than it should, if someone keeps gently, carefully suggesting to the people around you that you are less than you are, trust that feeling. Check the load-bearing walls. Ask the questions out loud. The people trying to take something from you are counting on the fact that you will doubt yourself before you doubt them. Don't give them that. I am sitting in my workshop right now while I tell you this. It is a Saturday. Noah is inside doing homework, or more likely doing homework for 20 minutes, and then watching something on his phone, which at 14 is about as honest a ratio as anyone gets. The shop smells like sawdust and machine oil. I am building a workbench, proper joinery, mortise and tenon, the way my grandfather showed me when I was not much older than Noah is now. My hands are steady. My head is clear. I burned the eggs that Tuesday morning and watched a crow on a fence post and thought nothing of it. The crow knew something I did not yet know. The morning was trying to tell me. I was not listening. I am listening now.